It all started on a cold Tuesday morning, the kind where the city streets are alive with their usual buzz. Coffee carts steaming on corners, car horns blending into a strange urban symphony, and the blur of people rushing to wherever the day demanded they be. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until it happened. A moment so subtle, so unassuming, it might have slipped right under your radar. But not today. Because today, you're about to hear a story that flips a typical power dynamic on its head and leaves an entire lobby of people speechless. A security guard, firm and cold, stops an elderly woman at the front doors of a luxury high-rise. She's in her 80s, hunched slightly, her coat buttoned all the way up to her neck, and she's holding a simple black handbag. She doesn't yell. She doesn't cry. She simply stands there with a quiet dignity as this man, without even a second thought, tells her she's not allowed inside. Now, most folks would have turned around, humiliated or angry. But not this woman. She did something different. And what happened next? It didn't just humble the man. It stunned everyone in the building. If you've ever judged someone based on how they look, or been on the receiving end of it, this story will hit a nerve. Because we live in a world where appearances often speak louder than reality. Think about it. How often do we walk past people every single day, never knowing who they really are or what stories they carry in their hearts? This video is about that hidden truth. The kind of truth that doesn't shout, but when it speaks, it changes everything. And the twist in the story? It's not just surprising, it's powerful. You're going to find out exactly who this woman is, and when you do, you'll realize why she stayed calm, even when being disrespected by someone half her age. But before we get there, let's make something clear. You didn't click on this video by accident. Something in the title made you pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe you've seen unfairness like this in real life. Or maybe, deep down, you know there's something satisfying about watching karma play out in real time. And trust me, you're not going to want to skip this. Because by the end of this video, you're going to get the answer you came here for, and I promise, it'll be worth it. This isn't just a story about respect. It's about identity. It's about legacy. And it's about what happens when people forget the value of humility. And right now, as you're watching, you're going to feel the same sense of unease, the same curiosity, the same gut-level reaction the people in that building felt when they realized the truth about this woman. And I'm going to walk you through every beat of that moment, so you can feel it too, just like you were standing in that lobby, watching it unfold. Now, here's the real hook. This elderly woman? She wasn't some random stranger who wandered in off the street. Nope. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She wasn't even visiting someone. She had every right to be there, more right, in fact, than anyone else in the building. But at that moment, no one recognized her. Not the receptionist. Not the doorman. And especially not the security guard who made a snap judgment based solely on her appearance. There's something so frustrating about watching someone be dismissed so quickly. But what's even more compelling? Watching them reveal who they truly are and watching the people who underestimated them suddenly scramble to make it right. And if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or treated like you didn't belong, you're going to relate to this woman in more ways than one. Because this story isn't just about her. It's about all of us. It's about what we all crave deep down: recognition, respect, and the dignity of simply being seen for who we are. So stay with me, because we're not just going to tell this story. We're going to unpack it. We're going to explore the subtle power plays, the silent moments, and the big reveal that no one saw coming. And more importantly, we're going to find out why she kept her cool when most people would have lashed out. This is about the long game. The quiet power of someone who knows exactly who they are and doesn't need to prove it to anyone until the moment it really matters. Now, let's talk about the guard. This man, tall, broad-shouldered, sunglasses still on despite being indoors, sits behind the front desk like a gatekeeper of some modern-day castle. He's not necessarily a villain. He's just a guy doing his job, or at least that's what he tells himself. But as we'll see, the way he does that job says a lot more about him than any uniform ever could. The truth is, he represents something bigger. He represents a culture where people in positions of minor power sometimes forget their humanity. where titles, security badges, and building access cards seem to carry more weight than kindness or common sense. But even more importantly, he becomes the perfect symbol for something we see everywhere: people judging others without even trying to understand them. And then there's the setting. Picture this: a sleek, state-of-the-art residential tower in the heart of the city. Everything inside screams status: marble floors, brushed gold elevator buttons, minimalist art on the walls. The kind of place where you expect to see high-powered executives, influencers, and tech entrepreneurs breezing in with iced coffees and earbuds. Not someone like her. Not an elderly woman with a soft voice and old-fashioned shoes. She was a mismatch in that world, or so it seemed. But sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who don't need to flaunt it. Sometimes, the real owners of the room are the quietest ones in it. And that brings us back to you. Because I want you to think about something right now. How many times in your life have you walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong? Or watched someone be pushed aside, ignored, or judged just because they didn't look the part? If that's ever happened to you, then what you're about to see in this story will feel like justice. Pure, simple, satisfying justice. But it won't come fast. It'll come like a slow burn, the kind that builds tension step by step, until finally, the truth drops like a mic and changes everything. That's what makes this moment so unforgettable. The moment of truth is coming. You'll see the look on the guard's face when he learns who she is. You'll hear the awkward silence in the lobby. And most importantly, you'll find out why she walked in that day and what she came to do. But not yet. First, you need to know more about her. About the life she lived before this day. About how she came to be the woman everyone dismissed and the legacy she quietly built while no one was watching. Because what you're about to discover isn't just a surprise, it's a master move. One that rewrites everything that came before. She didn't flinch when the building manager came barreling toward her, his polished shoes clapping loudly against the marble floor as he rushed past the security desk. His face had gone pale, mouth slightly open like he had just seen a ghost. Or rather, someone he hadn't expected to appear in the flesh ever again. The elderly woman simply turned her head, ever so slightly, and regarded him with the kind of calm grace that only comes with age and long-held wisdom. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The way the manager's demeanor shifted told the entire lobby everything they needed to know, that the assumptions they'd just made were dead wrong. But still, no one knew the full story. Not yet. Because up until that moment, this woman had been little more than a memory to most people who worked in the building. A name they'd seen on a plaque near the main entrance. A name associated with a property company that owned multiple skyscrapers throughout the city, yet rarely, if ever, seen in person. She was a phantom of the past to many, a legacy whispered about in meetings, mentioned in contracts, but never fully understood by those who now clocked in under her empire. And that's exactly how she preferred it. For the past few years, she'd been almost invisible, retreating from the fast-paced chaos of corporate life and settling into a quiet routine far from the public eye. Not because she was frail or incapable, but because she had nothing left to prove. Her name, though almost forgotten by the new faces running the show, had once commanded attention in every real estate circle across the country. A trailblazer, they called her. The first woman to develop high-rises in that part of the city back when very few took a woman's vision seriously, especially one who started with nothing. She had fought tooth and nail to build a portfolio from scratch, faced zoning board dismissals, bank loan rejections, and backroom deals made without her knowledge. But she didn't crumble. She watched. She learned. She adapted. And eventually, she turned the tables, buying the very buildings she had once been denied access to. This was one of them, the crown jewel of her legacy. And yet, as the years passed and newer executives came on board, her presence slowly faded into a series of legends passed between HR orientations and whispered elevator gossip. She was tough, they'd say. A real dealmaker, old school. But I think she retired years ago, and that assumption, that she had quietly stepped down and moved on, was one of the reasons why no one recognized her that day. But it wasn't entirely their fault. She had kept her appearances minimal on purpose. After her husband passed, She stepped further out of the public light, choosing instead to travel overseas, meet with small business owners in underdeveloped towns, and fund housing projects without ever attaching her name. She stayed off social media, never gave interviews, and didn't bother attending board meetings unless absolutely necessary. Most of her directives were passed through attorneys or long-trusted advisors who knew her style and protected her interests. But what few people knew, what no one in that lobby could have possibly guessed, was that she had returned. Quietly, without press or announcement. And she was there for a reason. Only a week earlier, she'd flown back into the city under the radar, booking a modest hotel instead of staying in the penthouse she technically still owned. She wanted to see the building with fresh eyes, not as its developer, not as its owner, but as a stranger. She wanted to observe how it functioned when no one knew she was watching. And what she found disappointed her. Corners had been cut. Maintenance schedules ignored. The new management team, overly focused on short-term profits, had been treating tenants like transactions. And the staff. Many were polite, but clearly overwhelmed and operating under strict rules that left little room for empathy or common sense. It was in that environment that she decided to test something. Something deliberate. Something personal. She would walk into the building, unannounced and unrecognized, and see exactly how she was treated by the very people tasked with protecting what she built. But there's more. Because this isn't just a story about her legacy or her silent return. There were whispers, unconfirmed and unspoken, that her sudden appearance wasn't random. Some said she had gotten wind of a sale being negotiated behind her back, something involving overseas investors who planned to get the interior and replace her hand-picked design with cold, modern minimalism. Others believed there was a personal angle, a betrayal, maybe, from someone inside her old circle. A former advisor, perhaps? Or a family member with access to sensitive files. That's where the mystery deepens. Because the more people she encountered during those first few days back in the city, the clearer it became that someone didn't want her there. And that day in the lobby? That wasn't just bad luck or an isolated moment of disrespect. It might have been a warning. A quiet message masked as coincidence. The security guard, for example, hadn't been working there long. He was a transfer from another location, moved in quickly after the last one left under vague circumstances. He followed the rules to the letter, sure, but there was something rigid about him. Something that made it seem like he had been told to expect trouble from unauthorized visitors and instructed to handle them firmly, even aggressively. And when she walked through those doors, he didn't hesitate to act. No ID, no entry. End of discussion. But what if someone had told him to expect a situation like that? What if someone inside the building wanted to ensure she never made it past the front desk? And that brings us to a few other strange pieces of the puzzle. 2 nights before the incident, the woman had dined alone at a quiet Italian restaurant she used to visit with her late husband. A waiter recognized her, not as the building owner, but as the kind lady who used to leave generous tips and ask about his family. They talked for a while, and she mentioned she was back in town, just observing, as she put it. The next day, that same waiter was approached by a man in a dark suit who asked about their conversation. Said he was a friend, just looking to reconnect. But something about that didn't sit right with the waiter, who later described the man as too polished, too rehearsed, like a guy pretending not to be a private investigator. Who was he really? And why was he tracking her movements? Then there was the elevator technician. Just days before she arrived, the elevators had mysteriously gone offline for nearly an hour during peak hours, a rare occurrence in a building known for its efficiency. Residents were annoyed, but the management team brushed it off as a glitch. Yet the technician noted that someone had tampered with the access panel near the top floor. And the top floor? That's where her old office used to be, sealed off for years, but never officially vacated. It raises an uncomfortable question. Was someone using her absence to conduct business she wouldn't have approved of? And if so, what would they do to stop her from returning? The woman had a small network of people she still trusted. A retired architect who once helped design the building's atrium. A former secretary, now living in the suburbs. And a family lawyer who would serve her for over 3 decades. They had all been contacted in recent weeks, seemingly unrelated, but each reported a similar pattern, Strange calls, vague requests for information, unusual legal inquiries. She connected the dots. Something was happening. Something quiet but calculated. And that's why she walked into that building unannounced. She wasn't there to make a scene. She was there to confirm a suspicion. But the moment she was stopped at the door, that was the first sign something was off. She'd expected to blend in, to move through the lobby unnoticed, maybe ride the elevator to the top floor and unlock her old office without anyone realizing who she was. Instead, she was intercepted before she could even reach the directory. And the guard didn't just stop her. He stood his ground like he was expecting her. That's what set off her instincts. That's when she knew someone might be watching. Now, as the manager stood before her, visibly shaken and searching for the right words, the tension in the room thickened. People were beginning to whisper. Phones were subtly lifted to record. The front desk clerk kept glancing toward the security camera as if waiting for instructions. But none came. Because the real story was just beginning to unfold. And the question hanging in the air, unspoken but loud, was no longer just, who is she? It was, why is she really here? And the answer to that? It's deeper than anyone realized. Just when she thought she was beginning to piece together the truth, the story twisted in a direction she didn't see coming. She had spent the next morning quietly reviewing old floor plans, going through archived documents with the help of her trusted lawyer, documents that had been stored off-site years ago for safekeeping. Everything was laid out meticulously: original ownership contracts, tenant lists, maintenance agreements, and a paper trail that clearly marked her as the sole stakeholder of the property. It was meant to be airtight. But then, something strange happened. By the time they returned to cross-check a key document, the one detailing the 2006 ownership transfer and sealed with her late husband's signature, it was gone. Not just misplaced, but missing entirely from the sealed binder it had always been stored in. Her lawyer, who was known for being obsessively organized, looked pale. "This was here 2 days ago," he said quietly, flipping through the pages again and again like he was hoping it would magically appear. It didn't. It felt too specific to be an accident. That document wasn't just sentimental. It was irrefutable proof that her husband had made a critical decision before his passing that blocked any sale or restructuring of the building without her approval. Without it, anyone could claim the original agreement had loopholes. She immediately knew this wasn't random. Someone had been watching her. Someone with enough access to slip into her world and erase just enough to cause doubt. The disappearance shook her. Not because she didn't have backups, she did, but because it told her just how far someone was willing to go to keep her from digging further. It wasn't just about the building anymore. It was about control, about power. And it was clear that whoever was behind this wasn't working alone. Later that afternoon, she received an anonymous envelope slid under her hotel door. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 5 words typed in bold, all caps font. "Stop looking or it gets worse." No signature. No context. Just a blunt warning. She stared at the message for several minutes before folding it carefully and slipping it into her purse. The timing was too convenient. Only hours after the document vanished, she was being warned. It was meant to intimidate her. But if anything, it confirmed her suspicions. Someone knew exactly what she was trying to uncover, and they were getting nervous. That meant she was close. Closer than she'd realized. But then came the part that made her second-guess everything. That night, she received a call from someone she hadn't heard from in over a decade, Marcus Trenton. He used to be one of her most loyal project managers back in the early days, ambitious, detail-driven, and someone she had mentored personally. They had parted ways under odd circumstances. After a promising run managing several of her properties, Marcus suddenly quit. No warning, no official explanation, just a brief email and a signed resignation letter. Rumor had it he'd taken a high-paying job with a major development firm overseas, but she always felt there was more to that story. Now he was back. Or at least that's what he said. "Just heard you were back in town," he said on the phone, his voice calm but calculated. "Thought I'd check in. See if there's anything you need help with." It felt rehearsed. Too smooth. She played along, but every instinct told her to be cautious. Marcus had always been ambitious, borderline obsessive with his career goals, and if he really had returned to the city, she needed to know why. Especially now. When she asked him where he was calling from, he hesitated for a beat before replying, just across the bridge, working on a new project in the East District. We should grab lunch. I think you'd find it enlightening. That word, enlightening, lingered in her mind. Was he offering help or trying to steer her away from something? The next day, her former secretary called from the suburbs, voice trembling. I don't know what's going on, she said, but someone came by my house yesterday asking about you. Said he was from a finance firm looking to settle some old estate matters. He asked if you were planning to sell your shares. The secretary, now retired, hadn't seen or heard from anyone in the business world in years. She was rattled. He showed me an old photo of you. From the early days. How did he even get that? The elderly woman stayed silent. It was the same photo that used to hang in her old office, one that was never made public. Whoever was behind this had access to personal archives. That changed everything. As she drove back toward the city, trying to process everything, another detail began to gnaw at her. The night before the incident in the lobby, she had walked by the building under the cover of night and noticed something strange. One of the lights on the 17th floor, the floor where confidential property records had once been stored, was flickering erratically. Not on a timer. Not part of the usual building maintenance. And worse, she could have sworn she saw movement inside. A silhouette. Brief. Gone before she could make sense of it. But she remembered it. Because that floor was supposed to be empty. It had been cleared out years ago during renovations and hadn't been reassigned since. So, why was someone up there? She had the building's blueprints in her possession, and she remembered something else about the 17th floor. There was a storage room tucked behind what used to be the legal department's office. A room that wasn't labeled on any digital floor plans. Back then, it had been used for housing backup files and legacy hardware that couldn't be digitized. If anything had survived the transition to cloud systems, it would be there. And that's where she planned to go next. But just as she started to make a list of everything she'd need to get access again, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Too late. You should have stayed away. She stared at the screen. There was no name, no callback option, just that one message and a picture. Grainy, low resolution, clearly taken from a distance. But unmistakable. It was her, standing in front of the hotel lobby, talking to her lawyer the day before. Someone had eyes on her. And they weren't just trying to erase her, they were watching her every move. Now, the mystery was no longer just about missing papers or shady deals. There was a bigger game at play. One that involved people she used to trust. And one of them, maybe even Marcus, wasn't just connected, they were orchestrating something. And the deeper she went, the more the past began to resurface. Old rivalries, broken promises, and a betrayal that had been hiding in plain sight for years. And then, just as she began to plan her next move, something else happened. Something no one expected. The hotel room she was staying in? She came back from a brief walk to find the door ajar. She froze in the hallway, her hand still on the doorknob, heart pounding in a way that felt deeper than fear. It felt like recognition. The door hadn't been forced open. There was no visible damage, no sign of struggle. Just the slightest, intentional gap, like someone wanted her to know they'd been inside. She pushed it open slowly, cautiously, half expecting to find the room in disarray or to be ambushed. But everything appeared untouched. The desk lamp was still on, casting a soft glow on the documents she'd left spread out that morning. Her laptop was exactly where she'd left it, and nothing seemed stolen. But when she stepped further inside, her eyes caught something new, something that hadn't been there before. A manila envelope, unmarked, lying directly in the center of her bed. Whoever had been here hadn't just slipped in unnoticed. They wanted her to see this. Her hands shook as she picked it up, the paper warm from the glow of the ceiling light above. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a different angle of the same building, the one she had walked by the night before, but this time, the photo was taken from across the street. and in the reflection of the glass entrance doors, her figure was clearly visible. She hadn't even known anyone was behind her. On the back of the photo, a message was scrawled in rough handwriting. "You're not the only one being watched." That one sentence shifted everything. This wasn't just a warning, it was a confirmation. Whatever was happening wasn't limited to her. Someone else was involved. Maybe someone she hadn't even considered yet. As if on cue, her phone buzzed again. A voicemail. This time from an old friend, Jackson Avery, a former tenant from the same building she once owned, now working in a small tech startup downtown. She hadn't spoken to Jackson in years, but they used to share quiet conversations in the lobby, bonding over their mutual appreciation for architecture and the old ways of doing business in a world rushing toward automation. She played the message and immediately heard the strain in his voice. "I need to talk to you," he said. "I think something's happening. I found something in the basement archives of our new office, and I don't know what it means, but it has your name on it. Please call me. I'm not sure who I can trust." It didn't make sense. The building his startup had moved into was unrelated, or so she thought. But Jackson had always been sharp, always curious. If he was reaching out now, after all this time, it had to be serious. She called back immediately, but the number went to voicemail. When she checked the address of his office, her stomach dropped. The building he now occupied? It was one of several low-profile properties that had quietly been absorbed by the same holding company that tried to block her re-entry at the original site. The company that never showed its full board of directors. The one her husband once warned her about before he passed, calling them invisible architects, pulling strings from behind shell companies. And now Jackson was tangled in it, too. She drove across town that evening, trying to process what this could mean. The route was familiar but heavy with tension, each red light stretching longer than usual, her mind racing with possibilities. She arrived just after 9, the streets mostly empty and the parking lot dim. The building was quiet, too quiet for a startup that usually ran on caffeine and late-night code sprints. She climbed to the second floor where Jackson's company was based, only to find a glass office door ajar and the lights inside flickering. Her breath caught. Something wasn't right. She stepped in cautiously, calling his name. No response. The main work area looked untouched, but when she reached Jackson's desk, she saw the reason for his panic. A file folder was open, filled with printed emails and scanned letters. And there it was, her name, repeated again and again in correspondence between shell companies, offshore accounts, and something called Operation Reclaim. Before she could make sense of it, she noticed something else. A sticky note stuck to the bottom corner of the monitor with only 2 words, "They know." And beneath it, taped to the edge of the screen, a second photo, this one older, faded. It showed her husband standing with 2 men she didn't recognize in front of a sign labeled Trentwood Development. She had never seen that picture before, and neither of the men had ever been mentioned in his public business history.
Who were they?
She reached for her phone to take a photo of the documents, but as she did, a faint sound broke the silence. A creak. From somewhere deeper inside the office. She turned slowly, eyes narrowing toward the hallway that led to the back conference room. For a moment, it was completely still. Then a shadow moved, quickly, deliberately, and was gone before she could get a full look. She didn't chase it. She knew better. Instead, she grabbed what she could and left the building fast, not even daring to glance back until she was in her car with the doors locked. On the way home, the weight of it all pressed harder. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had buried years of history, forged deals behind closed doors, and built a false narrative designed to erase her influence entirely. And now it was unraveling, but not just for her. Jackson, her former lawyer, her old building staff, even her late husband, all of them seemed to be part of something bigger. Something that had been in motion long before the confrontation at the lobby. It was never just about ownership. It was about erasure. And whoever was behind it had prepared for every possibility, except her return. She parked outside the hotel, hoping for even a sliver of normalcy, only to find another envelope waiting at the front desk. This time, no photo. Just a short note, printed in the same font as the last. "He lied to you. Ask about 2009. Her hands trembled as she read it again. The year haunted her. 2009 was when her husband had made his most controversial deal, a deal she thought had fallen through. But now, it was clear that wasn't the case. And suddenly, everything she thought she knew about him, their marriage, their work, their shared legacy, felt like it was built on half-truths. She stared out into the darkness, realizing that the Rael story might not be about her at all. It might be about what he left behind. But before she could even reach her room, her phone lit up again with a new message from Jackson's number. Except this time, the message was just one word: run. As she stood frozen in the hotel lobby, gripping the phone with the message still glowing on the screen, run, her pulse roared in her ears like a train barreling through a tunnel with no brakes. The word echoed in her mind, not as a suggestion, but a command laced with urgency. She felt the blood drain from her face as the weight of everything she had uncovered crashed into her all at once. Her instincts screamed that she wasn't just being watched anymore, she was being hunted. She looked around quickly, trying to remain calm, pretending to check her email as her eyes scanned the room. The concierge gave her a polite nod, unaware of the dread clawing at her chest. Two men were seated in the lounge behind a column, one with a tablet, the other sipping something dark and unmoving. Neither looked up, but something about their stillness felt unnatural. Her gut clenched. She didn't know who she could trust anymore. By the time she reached her hotel room, her hand was trembling so badly she fumbled the keycard twice before finally getting the door open. She bolted it behind her and stood silently, back pressed against the frame, listening for any footsteps in the hall. Nothing. Just the eerie hum of the hallway lights outside. She turned off the main light and walked to the window, keeping herself hidden behind the curtain's edge. Down in the parking lot, a black sedan idled with its headlights off. It wasn't parked illegally, and there were plenty of guests coming and going, but something about the way it hadn't moved in 20 minutes made her stomach twist. She tried to tell herself it was nothing. Maybe just someone waiting for a ride. Maybe her nerves were fraying. But then her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text, it was a photo. Sent from an unknown number. It showed her, taken from behind, standing at the hotel window just seconds ago. Her breath hitched. She yanked the curtain shut and stumbled back, the walls of the room suddenly pressing inward. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Someone was here. They were watching her movements with precision, and now they were making sure she knew it. She checked the peephole. The hallway was empty, but paranoia dug its claws in deeper, and every noise felt exaggerated, every creak of the building now sounding like a footstep. Desperate for grounding, she called Jackson again. No answer. She tried his office line, still nothing. She even called his sister, whose number she hadn't used in years, but it went straight to voicemail. That was when she checked the news. Local reports said there had been a break-in at the building his startup used, but no injuries were reported. Oddly, no names were mentioned, and the footage they aired was conveniently cut before the section she had visited. It felt sanitized, stripped of anything meaningful. The deeper she searched, the more it became clear. Someone was scrubbing any trace of what had happened that night. Even the sticky note she had taken from Jackson's monitor was gone when she looked through her belongings. She swore she had packed it. Had someone gone through her things? Or was she just starting to unravel? She opened her laptop, hoping to find clarity in the files she managed to grab, but the screen blinked once, then went black. An error code she didn't recognize flashed in red before the machine shut down entirely. Every trace of the files she had saved, gone. She tried to reboot, but nothing worked. It was as if the laptop had been remotely wiped. She stared at the blank screen, trembling. This wasn't just some corporate cover-up or hostile business maneuvering. This was something far more deliberate and far more personal. Her thoughts spiraled. She remembered how her husband had grown distant before his death. How he had started locking his study, taking late-night calls he wouldn't explain, how he once told her, in passing, that if anything ever happened to him, she should never trust the people smiling the widest at his funeral. At the time, she had brushed it off as stress, the kind of cryptic musing wealthy men tended to say when they were under pressure. But now it felt like a breadcrumb he had left behind. a warning she hadn't understood until it was too late. It was nearly midnight when her phone rang again. This time it was from a number she recognized, her former assistant, Claire. She answered immediately, relief flooding her voice as she asked if she was safe, if she had seen the news. But Claire's voice was thin, shaky. "I shouldn't be calling," she whispered. "They're watching me too. I found something you need to know. About the foundation and your name. It's all tied together." Then the line cut off. Not dropped. Disconnected. Just gone. She tried calling back, but the number was already out of service. She stared at her reflection in the dark glass of the window, not recognizing the woman who looked back at her, tired, wary, adrenaline keeping her upright. That was when the fire alarm in the hotel blared, red lights flashing across the hallway outside. Her heart jumped. People began pouring into the hallway, confused, some in robes, others grabbing phones and wallets. A real emergency? Or a distraction? She grabbed her bag and joined the crowd. If someone was coming for her, she wouldn't be alone in a crowd. Or so she hoped. Outside, the fire trucks hadn't even arrived yet, and hotel staff looked as confused as the guests. Then she saw it, another envelope, taped to the windshield of her car. No one had been near it moments ago. No one should have been able to leave anything there. But as she tore it open, her knees nearly buckled at the words typed inside. "You've been looking in the wrong place. He wasn't the only one lying to you." And that was when she realized the danger wasn't just about uncovering her husband's secrets. Someone else, someone still close to her, had been feeding her a false sense of control. And she had no idea who it was. She drove for hours that night, past the glowing city skyline, through winding side streets and forgotten neighborhoods, running more from her own thoughts than any visible threat. Her mind reeled with everything she'd uncovered, everything that had been ripped away. The envelope still sat on the passenger seat beside her, its single sentence playing on a loop inside her head like a haunting lullaby. "He wasn't the only one lying to you." It was impossible to ignore the weight of that line, especially now that so many things no longer added up. Her husband's sudden death, the erased files, the missing sticky note, Claire's disconnected call, everything pointed to something deeper, something older. And yet none of it explained the growing feeling that the real danger was closer than she dared imagine. When she finally reached the edge of town, headlights off, pulling into the long-abandoned property her husband once purchased for investment purposes, she expected nothing more than a cold, empty structure. But the second she stepped inside the dark, dust-ridden building, the atmosphere changed. There was movement, faint footprints in the thick dust. A coffee cup still warm to the touch. Someone had been here, and recently. She crept inside, flashlight sweeping through empty corners, and it was there, beneath a false panel in the wall, that she discovered something that shattered the ground beneath her feet. A collection of sealed folders, all labeled with names. Names of people she knew. Her name included. Inside were surveillance photos, financial reports, phone transcripts, even internal memos from companies she'd never heard of, but that were linked to her husband through shell corporations and dummy addresses. But none of it compared to what she found tucked in the back of the folder labeled with Jackson's name. It was a letter, handwritten, clearly rushed, with smudges of ink where the writer's hand had trembled. It began, "If you're reading this, it means I've failed to protect you from the truth." Her hands went cold. It was her husband's handwriting. He hadn't died in an accident. He'd faked his own death. And the more she read, the clearer it became. The entire sequence of events since his death had been meticulously staged to lead her to this moment. According to the letter, he had discovered a network, something that went far beyond business or politics. It was about control, influence, and erasing inconvenient people who stumbled onto the wrong truths. And he had tried to get out. But they warned him, disappear, or your family pays the price. He had chosen to vanish to protect her, setting in motion a chain of events he hoped she'd never have to untangle. But someone had intervened. Someone had gone off script. Because what he hadn't anticipated was betrayal by someone he'd once called his brother. The name that followed made her stomach turn. Jackson. Her most trusted ally. The man who had consoled her, guided her, who claimed to be helping her uncover the truth. The man who had gone silent when things turned dangerous. But the files in front of her told a different story. Jackson hadn't disappeared. He had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes, using her to locate the files her husband had hidden, feeding her just enough breadcrumbs to keep her digging, but never enough to reveal the full truth. He had been using her, not to find justice, but to destroy the only leverage her husband had against a very powerful enemy. And yet, as devastating as that realization was, something still didn't make sense. If Jackson was the one manipulating everything, why warn her to run? Why the mysterious messages and near misses that felt like someone was protecting her, not hunting her? That's when she noticed it, a second letter buried beneath the first. This one was addressed to Jackson, written in the same familiar script. She hesitated, then opened it. It read, "If you ever read this, you know I trusted you once. I'm trusting you again. Protect her like I couldn't. But if you betray her, the failsafe will activate. You know what that means." Failsafe? Her breath caught. What failsafe? And why had Jackson never told her about it? Was he protecting her or protecting himself? Her thoughts spiraled as the truth unfolded in dizzying layers. Her husband had never truly left her. He had orchestrated a plan with failsafes and secrets embedded so deeply it would take years to decode. But someone else was already moving the pieces, and she had no idea if they were on her side. Everything she believed about the story she was unraveling, the betrayal, the danger, the missing files, had suddenly flipped upside down. And now, staring at the evidence with her name stamped on it, the bigger question hit her like a thunderclap. Maybe this hadn't been about her husband all along. Maybe she was the target from the beginning, and she was about to find out why. She drove straight through the night without a plan, heart hammering against her ribs, as if trying to break free from the truth she'd just uncovered. Her fingers trembled on the wheel, mind racing with the words she had read, replaying every conversation she'd ever had with Jackson through a sharper, darker lens. But none of it compared to the weight of what she was about to do. Because if that letter was real, if her husband had entrusted Jackson with her protection and also built a failsafe to stop him, then she was standing in the crossfire of two men who had once loved her in completely different ways. And now, one of them might be planning to silence her for good. She needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. She had to confront Jackson. The sun was just beginning to rise when she arrived at the secluded cabin where Jackson used to take her husband for getaway weekends, a place he claimed no one else knew about. She knew the route from years ago, a back road barely marked on maps, surrounded by tall pines and forgotten silence. But when she stepped onto the porch and knocked, she didn't expect him to open the door so easily, as if he had been waiting for her. His face showed no surprise, only tired acceptance, like he had known this moment would eventually come. The room smelled like coffee and regret. And when she asked him about the letter, about her husband, about the surveillance files with her name on them, he didn't even flinch. Instead, he asked her a single question that changed everything. "Did you open the red envelope?" She hadn't. It was buried beneath the others in the hidden wall cavity, and in the chaos of what she'd found, she hadn't noticed it. Jackson's expression darkened when she told him. He looked away, jaw clenched, before stepping aside to let her in. What followed wasn't a confession, not really. It was more like a negotiation, a brutal, emotionally charged standoff between two people who had once trusted each other implicitly but now stood on opposite sides of a secret war. He didn't deny helping her husband disappear, but he also didn't admit to betraying him. Instead, he painted a picture far more complicated than anything she could have imagined. A years-long operation involving shadow companies, missing persons, offshore accounts, and a private security firm that specialized in high-risk extractions of compromised individuals. Her husband had gotten in too deep and had wanted out, but not everyone involved was willing to let him walk away. And that's when Jackson gave her the ultimatum. He slid a burner phone across the table and said, "You have a choice. Call this number, and they'll protect you. You'll disappear. New name, new life, no more danger. Or you go back to that red envelope, and I can't help you after that. You go down the rabbit hole alone, and you may not come back. Her stomach sank. It wasn't just a choice between truth and safety. It was a choice between finally understanding why her life had fallen apart and giving it all up to preserve what was left of her freedom. She looked at the phone, then at him, and for the first time, saw the guilt behind his guarded eyes. She asked him one final question. Was any of it ever real? Your friendship? Your help? And for a split second, he hesitated, just long enough to make her realize the truth was buried deeper than even he was willing to admit. But before she could press further, a noise shattered the silence. A crash outside. Tires screeching. Voices shouting in the woods. Jackson moved first, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her toward the back door. They found us, he hissed. You have to choose now. She bolted, heart racing, legs burning as she followed him through the trees. But even as she ran, her mind wasn't on the threat behind them. It was on that red envelope. What was inside? Why had Jackson feared it so much? And more terrifying, why had her husband saved it for last? She didn't know what waited at the end of this path, only that she couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything. But what she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that someone else had already opened the envelope. And they were watching everything. They made it to a safe house Jackson had prepared years earlier, an unlisted apartment above a long-abandoned print shop, tucked between forgotten alleys and blank storefronts. But the second she stepped inside, she felt it in her chest. This wasn't sanctuary. It was a holding cell. And for the first time, the panic crept deeper than her skin. The blinds were already drawn. The electricity humming low. Jackson moved with precision, too confident, too familiar, like someone not surprised they'd made it out alive. She started asking herself things she hadn't dared consider before. What if this wasn't about protecting her at all? What if Jackson had been keeping her close for a reason? Not to shield her from the storm, but to control where the lightning struck. While Jackson double-locked the front door and checked the signal jammers, she slipped into the back room and connected the portable drive she'd hidden in her jacket. The documents she'd copied from the red envelope weren't just personal files. They were maps, communications logs, offshore banking records, and a heavily redacted list of names. She ran a keyword scan on her own name. It lit up dozens of times, but what made her blood freeze wasn't the number of mentions. It was the context. She wasn't an accidental player in all this. She was a primary subject, the daughter of a man once listed in the inner circle of the very network her husband had tried to dismantle. Her entire life, every opportunity, every carefully orchestrated meeting, it had all been monitored, maybe even designed. Then the door buzzed. Once. Then twice. Jackson didn't flinch. It's her, he muttered. Before she could ask who, the door opened and Claire stepped in. Her best friend. The one who had gone silent just days before. But Claire wasn't panicked. She wasn't injured. She wasn't even confused. She was calm, focused. And in that instant, everything fell into place like a sick joke with the punchline held just out of reach. Claire had been in it the entire time. Her voice on the line during those chaotic calls, her presence at the funeral, the missing contact files from her phone. She had been watching, guiding, even shaping the narrative all along. And the betrayal hit harder than anything she'd discovered so far. Claire didn't apologize. She sat down, folded her hands, and said, "You were never supposed to get this far." Jackson didn't stop her. He sat beside her. And that's when the ground shifted completely. They weren't enemies. They were partners. And now the weight of every choice came crashing down. The envelope. The failsafe. The quiet tracking. It hadn't been about uncovering the truth. It had been about how much she could be trusted with it. This was a test, but not one she had agreed to take. She demanded answers, her voice shaking but sharp. Jackson finally spoke, his words hit like gunfire. Your husband didn't disappear to protect you. He disappeared to protect them from you. The files in the envelope were supposed to trigger a reset. If she found them, it meant she had crossed the threshold, become too dangerous to monitor, and needed to be contained. But she had gone off script. Instead of running, instead of burying the secrets, She had exposed the system's blind spot. And now, the only option left was to either recruit her or erase her. Then Claire opened a leather case on the table and revealed a small, worn notebook. Not a weapon. Not a file. A diary. Her mother's diary. She hadn't seen it since she was 10. It had disappeared the night her mother died in a car accident, an accident she'd been told was caused by a drunk driver. But now, staring at the pages, she saw entries about meetings, code names, phrases like the second generation, and a chilling final entry. They will come for her one day. And when they do, she'll have to choose. Tears blurred her vision, but her pulse was sharp, clear. She finally understood. This had started long before her husband. Long before her marriage. It had started with her mother. With a legacy of secrets passed from one silent generation to the next. And now, with Jackson and Claire standing across from her, waiting, watching, she knew the truth. She wasn't just part of the conspiracy. She was the center of it. And the choice they offered her now, join them or vanish, wasn't just about loyalty. It was about survival. She sat in silence, the room spinning with too many truths and not enough time to untangle them. Claire and Jackson watched her from opposite sides of the table, quiet, calculating, waiting for her decision like it was some kind of test, but the moment felt anything but measured. Her mother's diary still lay open in front of her, revealing not just memories, but warnings. Warnings written in a code she now realized she had spent her whole life being conditioned to understand. The words were just as much hers as they had been her mother's. This wasn't an accident. This was an inheritance. And the final clue was hidden in plain sight. Her hands moved on instinct, flipping back through the diary to a page that had been dog-eared and smudged from use. She stared at the symbols, one in particular, and everything clicked. It wasn't just a journal entry. It was a cipher key, tied to the same symbols she'd seen in the files from the red envelope, scribbled in the margins of her husband's hidden notes, etched onto the side of the surveillance tapes she thought were meaningless. It was all connected. Her mother hadn't just been documenting a conspiracy. She'd been encoding a map, one that pointed to the central node of the entire network. Not a person, a location. With her pulse thudding in her ears, she shoved the diary into her bag and stood up. "You brought me here because you thought I'd run," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "But I'm not running. I'm finishing what my mother started." Claire moved to stop her, but Jackson hesitated, eyes narrowing with something like pride, or maybe regret. He reached into his coat and tossed her a key. "If you're going to the Foundation," he said, "you're going to need this. No more questions. No more games." The final act had begun. She drove alone to the location the symbols pointed to, an abandoned museum her mother used to take her to as a child. She remembered loving it for the glass ceilings and empty echoing halls, never realizing those visits were more than nostalgic detours. They were rituals, markers, clues. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. Every step down the stone corridor felt heavier, more deliberate. And when she reached the sealed archive room, the key Jackson gave her slid into the lock with a soft click that felt deafening in the silence. The room inside wasn't what she expected. No flashing servers or underground bunkers. Just shelves of records, reels of footage, and an old analog switchboard still wired into a wall that shouldn't have had power. She followed the lines until they converged into a single terminal. On the screen, a frozen frame from a video feed showed her husband, alive, seated, and speaking directly to the camera. She hit play. His voice trembled with urgency. "If you're watching this, you've found the truth. Or, at least enough of it. I couldn't tell you everything, not because I didn't trust you, but because I knew they were watching. Claire. Jackson. Even your father. They're not villains. They're survivors. Just like we tried to be." He looked down, then back up, eyes heavy with apology. "This was never about protecting me. It was always about protecting you. Because your mother didn't die in an accident. She was silenced. And they'll do the same to you if you don't shut it down." He gave her the final piece, the location of the off-grid server farm hosting all the operational data for the entire Shadow network. If she could reach it, She could expose everything. The surveillance files, the blacklists, the real names behind the shell companies and fake foundations. But doing so meant triggering the final failsafe. A system built to erase the digital identities of anyone involved, including her own. And then she heard it. Footsteps behind her.
Claire.
Gun drawn. Face torn between rage and fear. "You weren't supposed to get this far," she hissed, the same words from before, only now laced with real desperation. "We were going to protect you.
Keep you safe.
You were meant to lead us, not destroy it all." And then Jackson appeared from the shadows too, but not to stop her. He turned to Claire. "This isn't your choice anymore." The air pulsed with tension. Her hand hovered over the final command line. One press, and the truth would flood the world. Everything they'd built, the lies, the shadows, the power, gone. But it also meant erasing herself. No more protection. No more hiding. No more home. She looked Claire in the eye, then Jackson, and then pressed the key. Everything went dark. But in that moment of silence, just before the system reset, she heard her mother's voice again, from the diary's final page, echoing in her mind. The truth never dies. It only waits for someone brave enough to bring it into the light. And just when it seemed like the story had ended, the screen blinked once. A new message loaded. Not from her husband. From someone else. Someone she never knew was watching. And the words were simple, terrifying, and final. "Welcome to Phase 2. The dust didn't settle quickly. The system crash sent ripples through more than just encrypted drives. It blew open sealed doors in government offices, exposed secret bank transfers linked to offshore entities, and crashed social media accounts that had been feeding the public curated lies for years. Headlines exploded across major news outlets. Hidden surveillance network exposed. Whistleblower tied to underground archive leak. What else are they hiding? But her name never made it into those articles, and that was exactly how she wanted it. After pressing that final key, she vanished. Not in the dramatic sense of disappearing without a trace, but in the quiet, deliberate way of someone who's finally stopped running. Her bank accounts dissolved, her phone went dark, and every digital fingerprint she'd ever left behind was scrubbed clean by the system she destroyed. One final act of protection coded by her husband, whose message had guided her through the storm and then allowed her to walk away from it. The farmhouse in Oregon wasn't much, but it had what she needed: silence, space, and the kind of air that made it easier to breathe again. There, she finally unpacked what had happened. Not just the conspiracy, but the personal betrayals and the decades of secrets that had shaped her entire life without her knowing. The revelation that her father wasn't just complicit but central to the creation of the network still stung the most. He believed in control as a form of love. In his eyes, protecting her meant hiding the truth from her, even if that meant making her live a lie. And while part of her hated him for that, another part understood just how broken he must have been to choose that path. Jackson sent one letter. No return address. No explanation. Just a photograph of her mother, smiling, holding her as a baby, standing in front of that same farmhouse decades earlier. On the back were 3 words, handwritten in ink that smudged slightly at the edges. She knew everything. The diary stayed with her. She still read it some nights, even though she had memorized every line. It was the closest thing she had to her mother now. Those coded messages of love and resistance, scribbled between mundane entries and hidden behind symbols only a daughter could unlock. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she had ignored the old woman at the building's door that day. If she hadn't turned her away. If she had just listened instead of judged. That woman had started everything. Not through force, but through presence. She was the mirror she hadn't realized she needed to look into. And now, thinking back, she wasn't so sure the woman had been a stranger. Maybe she was another guardian in disguise, part of the network of silent watchers who'd been waiting for her to wake up. But just when it seemed like the world had finally returned to stillness, something happened that cracked it open again. A package arrived at the farmhouse. No return label. Inside was a simple flash drive and a note. No words, just a symbol. One she hadn't seen before, but it pulsed with the same energy, the same design language as the ones in her mother's journal. This wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. Maybe pulling down one curtain had only revealed another stage. But she was different now. Stronger. Smarter. Ready. And so the story ends not with a scream or a bang, but a quiet breath, a candle lit in the dark, and a single question whispered through the silence. What would you do if the truth knocked on your door?
Would you let it in?
Some stories don't finish neatly. They echo. And this one, might just be the beginning of something far bigger than anyone ever imagined. Because the building wasn't just hers now. The future was too.